Hey there, my name is Kelly, and this is Story in the Frame. Today we marinate over a photo of mine called Strokkur Geysir. I'm trying something new this week, which is having a before photo so you can see how this area looks when there is no eruption. Let me know if you dig this or not in the comments. Strokkur is a geyser in southwestern Iceland. It's a highly active and often erupting hot spring. It spouts often, about every 5 to 10 minutes, and the word Strokkur means the churn. And these torrents of water happen far more frequently than any other geyser in Iceland. And sometimes you think you've missed one, but all you gotta do is wait a few more minutes and you have another and another. And we found as we were there that if you waited long enough, they would get progressively bigger and bigger. And so if you were there for just a small one, you just had to know that you were going to wait. Just wait a little while for a bigger one to hit. So I had been here to this area 2 weeks before, and it was raining so hard you could barely go outside. It was so much rain. We didn't actually make it up to the geyser because you couldn't see anything. It was just wide out with rain. 2 weeks later, we went there to go find this geyser, and we lucked out. It was just a beautiful sunny day with a nice light cloud cover, and the conditions were just perfect. And so when I got there, I was really excited to find just the right spot to capture this geyser. And I wanted to get it backlit by the sun because I thought that's really important to be able to see the edges of the geyser, especially looking up against white clouds. You really want to perceive the distance of what's near to you and what's far away out in the sky. And so after a few minutes, I found the right spot. And if you look in the photo up here, the bright patch right below the tip of the eruption is the sun, and the geyser is perfectly covering it so that you get just maximum backlight. And that was really it took me so long to get into the spot where I was getting that perfect backlight. And you can see actually the shadow on the ground that it casts. There's so much moisture in that little pocket that's bursting up that it just blocks out the sun right there. We waited for a few eruptions, and as it built up, I kept finding my spot, and I found one spot that was really, really close. In fact, it was as close as you could get before you hit the rope at the bottom there. And so I had my weather gear on, and I had my rain jacket, and I brought a bandana to tie around my mouth because I knew that it had a very, very sulfury smell. I didn't want to be bothered by that while I was trying to shoot my photo. So I looked like a renegade photographer. I had, all this weather gear on and a bandana and a hat brimmed down low. And so I tucked in here and I got on my knee and I waited for that eruption. And it's so strange because, the hot water smells like sulfur, but it's actually really, really good for you. It's great water to bathe in or to shower in. It just has a kind of an eggy smell, and that's from the high sulfur content. But it's geothermal, and so it's that temperature or water coming out of the ground, which is really amazing. So I had been to some spas that had this hot water, and you can smell it. It's not too bad once you get used to it, but if you don't know it's going to happen, then you think there's something wrong with the water when you get there. But once you're used to it, and once you know, it's actually pretty good for you, and it's great. But but you don't want to drink the hot sulfur water. The water there, you turn to cold on the tap, and you get this really incredible, fresh, ice cold spring water coming right out of the tap, and it's the best water I've ever tasted. But going back to this geyser, I waited and waited, and there's something about this place where you can feel before the eruption happens. You just know it. The hair on the back of your neck stands up, and you can just tell that something's about to happen. And I don't know if that's low ground vibrations or if there's some sort of pressure change, but you can just tell. You can just tell the moment before it happens. And then you start to hear bubbling happen over in this pool, and the pool just looks like a natural, it looks like somewhere you could go, take a dip. If you didn't know what was about to happen and you wandered out there in your swimsuit, you'd definitely be in the wrong place because that water's crazy hot when it explodes upwards. But I found it so thrilling to take this photo because you had to get in on all your gear and your bandana, and I got really, really close, and everybody else was standing way far away. They didn't want to get sprayed by this thing, but I didn't care. I wanted a photo from down low and up close so you could feel like you were there. And so I'm on my wide-angle lens, It's a 16 to 35 millimeter lens, and I got as close as I could, and I just waited. And when this thing erupted, it was twice as big as any of the other eruptions had been, and I wasn't ready, so I zoomed back as fast as I could and kind of leaned back as fast as I could, and I shot probably 120 images. I just held the trigger down as this thing exploded, and so I could capture every moment of it going up into the air. And this shot is about 3 frames before the water just came and soaked me. I just got hit with all of the steam and all of the mist and all of the water, and I was just soaked. But luckily I was ready for it. I was in all my all-weather gear, and my camera, this Sony a7R III, is pretty weather sealed, and so was the lens, so I wasn't worried about it, even though it was covered in water. So I got this photo, and I got back, and I walked, out of the spray zone, and I dried it all up, and I thumbed through those images as I found just the one I wanted. And this is the one I tagged when I was there. I was like, this one has everything I'd hoped this photo would have. Bright sun backlighting the back. We got lucky with cloud cover, so you can see how big the sky is here and how far the clouds go back. I could see the mountains. It wasn't too misty back there. And what I really love about this photo, and what I haven't seen in a lot of other photos, is people in the background. You see those little dots on the back left when the photo's out wide. As you zoom in further and further, you realize those aren't trees or rocks. Those are people. And that's how big this geyser is. And it's so impressive being under this giant just eruption of the earth. So this is situated just east of Mount Lagerfell, and it's a particularly rich area for hot springs and geyser activity. It's part of what's called the Golden Circle. This is like a pretty exciting thing to go to. If you're in Reykjavik, it's not a very far drive to get to this, and it's pretty touristy, but that doesn't make it not worth going to see. In fact, it's very, very much worth going to see, because there's only a few places in the world that have geysers that erupt with this kind of impressive flow and power, and often enough that you can plan on it, that you can plan on seeing it when it happens. And there's other geysers around here. In fact, just behind me a few hundred feet is this geyser called the Great Geyser, and for many years it was the one you could count on to erupt. In fact, it's really the first time Europeans found a geyser that was this frequent and specific when it would erupt. But over the years, as volcanic activity took place, it became less and less eruptive. You couldn't count on it as much. And now it's kind of hit or miss. You never know when it's going to go off. But at the same time, that activity is what started the Strokkur Geysir becoming more and more frequent. And what causes a geyser to erupt is a few different factors. And it's pretty specific, these geological factors that have to combine to make a geyser happen. And not only happen, but happen frequently. So the molten magma has to be sufficiently close to the surface of the earth to make the rock hot enough to boil water. And so that's what's happening under there. It's literally boiling the water. And a sufficient and continuous source of flowing underground water is essential, because after it gets boiled and evaporated and blows up, you have to have more water rushing in. And this drains from the Lagerkul Glacier, which is close by on its journey to the Hakadalur, spills through the porous lava, and it's just a constant water supply, and that's how you get that geyser activity. And so it's essentially, think of it as a chamber that fills up with this cold water, and then the rocks heat it up and heat it up and heat it up until finally it's so hot and the pressure builds up so high there's nowhere for it to go, and it just blows out this expanse of mist and hot water. And it just kind of piles up on the sides as it spills out or it evaporates, and then that chamber is filled again, and the time it takes to fill that chamber and heat the water is the time between eruptions. It's thought that the Strokkur Geyser was inactive or very, very quiet until an earthquake in 1789 shook it up and kindled its activities. Pretty regularly spouts to heights of 65 to 80 feet, but it can get up to 130 feet. And I feel like that's probably what you're seeing here, is somewhere between 100 and 130 feet of eruption. So to get to some of the nerdy camera stuff, this photo was shot on a Sony a7R Mark III, and it was shot at a focal length of 16 millimeters. And It's at a 5.6 aperture, and the exposure time was 1/2500th of a second. I really wanted a very, very fast shutter to capture all the little drops in the air. And so if we look close, you can see those drops. And in fact, in later photos in the series of shots I took, you can see the drops right about to hit the lens, and then they hit the lens and the lens is covered. And it's pretty fun. And perhaps maybe one day I'll do a little GIF of that eruption so you can see it just cover me and the camera. But for now, that's it for this week's Story in the Frame. Thanks for coming on this deep dive with me to explore the geysers of Iceland. Next week, who knows, I might throw in a little surprise.